I'm Rachel Donovan, and if you're hearing my voice now, it means I lived to tell the story they tried to silence. Not long ago, I was the woman who smiled at dinner parties, nodded through boardroom meetings, and signed every dotted line my husband handed me. I believed in love, I believed in trust, I believed that if you gave someone everything, your name, your heart, your future, they'd protect it. I was wrong. The people closest to me didn't just betray me. They planned my disappearance. They forged papers, rewrote medical records, and prepared my obituary before I'd even had the chance to fight back. But I heard the call. I saw the files. And I remembered who I was before they told me I was nothing. This is not a story of a victim who got lucky. This is the story of a woman who stopped waiting to be saved and became the one who saved herself. So lean in, because what I'm about to share might just make you question everything you thought was safe. Chapter 1. The call he didn't know I heard. I wasn't supposed to be home that night, but fate, like betrayal, rarely asks for permission. The air in our Seattle home was thick with the scent of eucalyptus candles and the faint hum of jazz from the kitchen speaker. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, still in my travel coat, one hand gripping the handle of my suitcase, the other frozen midair with the keys dangling loosely. It was 7:54 p.m. I had landed 2 hours earlier than expected, an early flight from Billings, Montana that no one had planned for, especially not Nathan. Upstairs, his voice drifted faintly, muffled but sharp. I paused, unsure if I had misheard. "She'll be out of the picture by Friday," he said, voice low but clear. "We just need the paperwork signed before the trust releases." My breath caught in my chest, a beat passed. The trust. My father's voice echoed in my memory, the last real conversation we had before his stroke. "The Donovan Trust will protect you, Rachel. As long as your name is on it, no one can touch what's yours." But Nathan wasn't supposed to be talking about my trust. He wasn't even supposed to know how it worked. I set the suitcase down soundlessly, inching toward the staircase with deliberate care. Each step creaked beneath me like a ticking clock. I could hear his phone now on speaker. A woman's voice responded, cool and rehearsed. "She's got no leaving siblings. If we time this with the disorientation symptoms, you'll be legally positioned to request conservatorship. A contact at Cascade Hills Clinic has already started drafting the intake recommendations." Cascade Hills? That was a psychiatric facility. My hand tightened around the staircase railing. Nathan laughed. It wasn't the warm laugh he saved for holiday dinners or our friends from the firm. It was the kind of laugh a man lets out when he's already counting money in his head. "Perfect. I'll make sure she takes the pills tonight. Once the side effects start showing, the rest is just paperwork." The hallway dimmed. Or maybe I blinked too long. For a second, I didn't feel the floor beneath me. Just 2 nights ago, we had toasted with vintage champagne in this same house. Nathan raising his glass to our future. To my 30th birthday, just days away, and to the freedom wealth can finally buy us. I thought he meant us. But now I understood. Nathan didn't marry me to build a life together. He married me to outlive me financially. I backed away slowly, each step a calculation. I couldn't confront him, not yet. I needed to think, to plan. My instincts, trained after years in Army intelligence, kicked in faster than fear could paralyze me. Once outside, I slipped into my car without turning on the lights. I drove 4 blocks. Parked near an old laundromat, and pulled out a second phone I hadn't touched since discharge. The burner phone. Maria Reynolds answered on the second ring. "Rachel!" Her voice was alert even at this hour. "I think he's going to try to kill me," I said, steady but cold. "And I think he has help." There was a pause. Then the tone of a soldier returning to battlefield. "Send me everything, right now." The rain had started by the time I pulled back into our driveway. Not a heavy storm, just the sort of slow, persistent drizzle that blanketed Seattle through half the year. The kind of rain that made everything quiet, but never truly still. I waited inside the car until the hallway lights blinked off through the front windows. Nathan must have gone to bed. Good. I stepped inside, wiping my boots on the mat as if everything was normal. But my eyes scanned the foyer like a stranger's. Every object, every corner suddenly unfamiliar in its familiarity. I wasn't looking for comfort, I was looking for evidence. I made straight for the small cabinet beside the stairs, where Nathan kept our home security system server. It was a simple backup device, discreet, unlabeled. Only 2 people in this house knew it existed, and I was one of them. The screen lit up. I entered the override code we had both agreed on when the system was installed 3 years ago, 4/27, his late mother's birthday. But what loaded wasn't what I expected. The past week's footage was there, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then nothing, Thursday night. Gone. No data. The hallway camera, kitchen cam, the main entrance feed completely missing from the timeline. Just a clean void between 6:42 p.m. and midnight. No errors, no corruption, just deleted. Huh. I leaned back, the realization chilling me more than the cold leather seat beneath me. Nathan had already covered his tracks. He knew how to navigate the system, sure, but more importantly, he knew what to delete. The footage from tonight, the night he didn't know I had returned early, the night he revealed everything. I pulled out the burner phone again and texted Maria. He wiped footage, full gap in logs, exactly the hours I returned. She replied almost immediately. Understood. Start recording anything from here on out. Use analog if needed. I left the cabinet and walked silently up the stairs, past our bedroom to the guest room at the far end of the hall. It hadn't been used in months, but tonight it would become my temporary base. I couldn't let Nathan know I had heard the call. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what he had planned and who else was involved. I opened the drawer beside the guest bed and pulled out a black leather-bound notebook, my old field diary from deployment. Blank pages waited. I started with a single entry. Thursday, April 4th, 7:54 p.m. He said I'd be out of the picture by Friday. He named Cascade Hills. He has a partner, female, American accent, professional. They're planning to drug me tonight. He already wiped the footage I wrote without emotion, as if debriefing someone else's life. And then I stared at the words. He's going to kill me, not metaphorically, not legally, not some slow marital betrayal drawn out over years, but fast, efficient, institutionalized. My hands trembled, but only for a moment. Around midnight, I stepped back into our bedroom. Nathan was asleep. Peaceful, almost angelic, if I hadn't known better. I sat at the edge of the bed and studied his face in the dim light. My eyes found the bottle on his nightstand. It wasn't mine. He had replaced my usual vitamins with small blue pills. I picked one up and pocketed it. Then, like nothing happened, I crawled under the covers beside him. If he planned to erase me so cleanly, what else had he already hidden in plain sight? Would you still sleep beside someone if you knew tonight might be the last time you ever woke up? Don't miss Chapter 2, where every forged signature and silent betrayal begins to unravel. Chapter 2. The files he forged, the trust he never understood. I used to believe trust was signed in ink until I saw mine rewritten in silence. The morning after the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear, the house felt colder. Not in temperature, but in presence. Nathan's cologne still lingered in the bathroom, the steam from his shower clinging to the mirror like a ghost of the man I thought I knew. He greeted me with a kiss on the forehead and a question about breakfast, as if last night's betrayal hadn't echoed off every wall of our bedroom. I played along. For now. Once he left for a client meeting, I moved fast. I slipped into the home office, his domain, where I was always a guest, never a participant. For years, I trusted that whatever was done in my name was done with love, but that trust had died with the sound of his voice planning my erasure. The safe was behind a false panel in the bookshelf, His secret he once drunkenly revealed on our anniversary, thinking it made him mysterious. The code? Our wedding date. Irony's a cruel companion. Inside, I found files. Thick, cold folders with my name on them, but the words weren't mine. Medical records, psychological assessments, therapy notes. I felt the weight of the paper before I could even register what they meant. Diagnoses I never received, signatures I never made. An official-looking evaluation marked me as clinically unstable, with a history of dissociation and emotional delusions. The psychiatrist's name? A Dr. Marcus Bell. I had never met him, I had never heard of him, and yet here, in this paper universe Nathan had carefully crafted, I was mentally unwell, legally compromised, and soon, if he succeeded, financially erased. I collapsed into the office chair, folder in lap, hands trembling. The realization hit in waves. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a campaign. A slow, methodical rewriting of who I was, on paper, until I couldn't fight back. But I wasn't that paper version, and now that I had the proof, I wouldn't stay silent. I photographed everything, each page, each forged note, every signature that wasn't mine but bore my name. I saved the images to an encrypted cloud folder Nathan didn't know existed, then backed them up to a USB tucked inside my boot. I had one name in my mind, Harrison Mitchell. He was the trustee of the Donovan Family Trust, my trust, a legacy from my father that Nathan never fully understood and certainly never respected. The trust was structured with layered protections. Harrison was one of them. A former federal investigator turned financial ethics consultant, he was the man my father chose to safeguard my future. And if anyone could see through the forgeries and manipulations, it would be him. I didn't call. I drove. 3 hours later, I sat in the glass-walled lobby of Mitchell & Associates in downtown Austin. The receptionist glanced at me, took in the anxious grip I had on my purse, and said gently, "You're not the first wife to walk in here this week." I looked up. "I'm not just a wife. I'm the next target of an asset execution." She blinked. "I'll let him know you're here." When Harrison stepped into the lobby, I half expected a banker's swagger. Instead, I saw calm calculation in the way he scanned me, sizing up the threat not that I posed, but the one I was running from. "Rachel Donovan," he said, extending a hand. "Your father warned me about Nathan. I just didn't think it would go this far." I held up the folder. "You haven't seen how far yet." Harrison led me into his private office. Sparse, clinical, but not cold. The books on the shelves weren't for show. The man had done his homework, and I suspected I wasn't the first betrayed heir to walk through his door. He waited until the door clicked shut behind us before speaking. "Start from the beginning," he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me everything." I laid it out piece by piece. The late-night phone call Nathan didn't know I overheard. The forged medical files, the whispers I hadn't paid attention to until now. The canceled appointments I never made. The friendly nods from strangers at the pharmacy. Nathan had been laying the groundwork for months, maybe longer, not just to make me seem unstable, but to eventually prove it. When I finished, Harrison nodded once. Then he stood, walked over to the file cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a locked drawer. "I need you to look at something," he said. He placed a document in front of me, an amendment Nathan had attempted to file to the Donovan Family Trust 2 months ago. It had been intercepted and flagged by Harrison's compliance team because of a signature mismatch. "I didn't sign this," Ed whispered. "I know," Harrison replied. And Nathan knew he needed all trustees' consent to access the principal before your 30th birthday, which means forging your medical unfitness wasn't just about discrediting you, it was about activating the emergency clause that lets the spouse step in as conservator. My throat tightened. He wanted to replace me. Legally, yes. But more than that, he wanted you out of the way before the trust matured. You become sole controller on July 18th. That's 35 days from now. He's running out of time. The calendar in my head clicked into motion. 35 days. That was the window. I had just over a month before Nathan made his final move, either by discrediting me, committing me, or worse. "What do I do?" I asked. Harrison didn't answer right away. He studied me for a long, silent moment. Then he opened another drawer and slid over a thin manila folder. "I want you to meet someone," he said. "Her name is Special Agent Maria Santos. She works financial crimes, specifically in marriage-based fraud and asset targeting. She's been circling a case that might intersect with yours." "Intersect how?" "Because Nathan isn't doing this alone," Harrison said. "And you're not the only woman listed as mentally compromised just days before her trust activates." I felt my stomach drop. He opened a file. Inside were photographs, documents, screenshots of transactions. But what made my pulse spike was a blurry image from a security cam. Nathan. Sitting across from a woman I recognized immediately. Sarah Morrison. A therapist Nathan once claimed had helped a colleague's wife through anxiety. I had met her once, in passing. Kind smile, unmemorable at the time. Now I saw her name on the falsified evaluation reports. "She's one of them," I whispered. "She might be the one," Harrison replied. "But if we're going to stop them, we need you to play along. Just a little longer. Let them believe you haven't caught on." I didn't speak, not right away. The weight of it all sank in. I was the target of a carefully designed takedown. But I had one advantage Nathan hadn't counted on. I had already heard the plan before it began, and now I had allies. Harrison leaned forward, voice low. "One more thing. This morning, someone tried to access your bank account using a restricted proxy server. Guess where it pinged from?" I stared at him. "From inside your own house. If Nathan forged documents and planted lies so easily, who else had access to my life without my consent? What would you do if the person you trusted most was quietly rewriting your reality while smiling across the dinner table?" Join me in Chapter 3, where trust fractures, alliances form, and the game turns deadly real. Chapter 3. The dinner he cooked to kill me. I used to think a home-cooked dinner was the purest act of love, until the night he handed me a glass of wine with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The candles were already lit when I walked into the dining room, their flickering glow casting shadows across Nathan's carefully prepared table. He was in the kitchen humming to himself, off-key as usual. Wearing the apron he used only on special occasions. Lobster risotto, my favorite, at least it used to be. He poured me a glass of Merlot before I even sat down. "You've had a long week," he said softly, pressing the rim of his own glass to his lips. "Let me take care of everything tonight." A week ago, I might have leaned into his chest and kissed his neck in gratitude. Now I simply smiled. A polite, hollow smile I'd practiced in the mirror. The kind you use when you're playing a part and know the stakes are life or death. "Thanks," I said, pretending to sip while the bitter scent of wine burned into my memory. I had switched the bottles earlier. His drink had the sleeping agent, not mine. The plan had to be perfect. I couldn't confront him directly, not when I still didn't know how deep this went. All I knew was this: the phone call I overheard, the forged documents, the hidden camera in the study I'd found this morning. Nathan was preparing to end me. Legally, financially, maybe even physically. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. He kept watching me, observing. Not lovingly, strategically. His fork scraped the edge of his plate with the kind of precision that sent a chill down my spine. He didn't ask about work. He didn't ask about the call from Harrison Mitchell, the Trust's executive director, that I hadn't told him I got. He only watched. "I've been thinking," he finally said, setting his wineglass down with a soft clink. "Maybe we should take a trip. Somewhere quiet, just us. You've been under so much stress lately, Rachel. You deserve a break." That wasn't a suggestion, it was a setup. I tilted my head. "That's sweet. Somewhere warm, maybe?" He smiled, too quickly. Mexico? Of course. No extradition. No Rachel. I stood and reached for the dishes. Let me clean up. No, no. Sit, he said, rising. I'll handle it. As he turned toward the kitchen, I quickly slipped the small plastic bag from my sweater pocket and sprinkled a fine white dust into his wineglass. It was harmless, just crushed antihistamines, but enough to make him sleepy. Slow. When he returned, I toasted. To us! He drank it in one go, and within minutes he began to yawn. I'm gonna lie down for a bit, he murmured, his speech slightly slurred. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek to stop from shaking. You do that, love. Once he disappeared down the hall, I sprang into action. I pulled out the hidden flash drive from the base of the table where I'd taped it the night before and inserted it into my laptop. It contained every video file, email draft, and audio log I'd copied from the hidden folder on his cloud account. Everything. The plans to declare me mentally unfit, the offshore account movements, even voice memos, recordings of Nathan and his associate Dr. Patel discussing how to slowly medicate me into submission. But one file stood out. The video began with static. Then a grainy image came into focus, a woman seated at a small kitchen table, her hands trembling around a porcelain mug. She couldn't have been more than 30. Her eyes were sunken, her hair flat, unwashed. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I don't know why I feel this way. Maybe I'm just not well, she whispered. Behind the camera, a man's voice responded, calm, reassuring. Nathan's voice. You're not crazy, Sarah. You're overwhelmed. That's why I've scheduled another session with Dr. Patel. He can adjust your dosage. Just trust me. I paused the video. Sarah Morrison. That name was familiar, too familiar. I pulled up the email Harrison had sent earlier. Attached was a spreadsheet listing prior flag cases of fiduciary abuse tied to the Donovan Family Trust. One name was highlighted in yellow. Sarah Morrison. Deceased. My chest tightened. She wasn't a trial run. She was a warning. This wasn't just about money. Nathan had done this before. And Sarah? She'd never made it out. The rage that pulsed in my veins wasn't just mine anymore. I was holding the story of a woman who had been erased, gaslit, possibly killed, all under the same plan he now tried to execute on me. I saved the video file under a new name, proof_1, then copied it to a private cloud account. The rest of the files followed, each one a nail in the coffin Nathan had built for himself. A sound from the hallway. I slammed the laptop shut. Nathan stood in the doorway, his body swaying slightly, eyes unfocused. But he was awake. You're still up? He asked, blinking hard. Just finishing some emails, I replied evenly, walking toward him. He reached out and brushed my shoulder. You look tired. I forced a smile. Yeah, I think I'll turn in soon. He nodded, stumbling toward the bedroom. I watched until the door clicked shut. Only then did I let myself exhale. The next morning, I left the house before sunrise. Nathan was still knocked out from the antihistamines, his breath slow and shallow. I left a note on the counter. Gone to yoga, back by 9. Just another weekday routine, just another illusion. Instead, I drove an hour north to Harrison Mitchell's office in Albany. The moment I entered, his assistant waved me through. I have the files, I told him, as soon as the door closed behind me. But it's worse than we thought. He scanned the USB I handed over. Sarah Morrison. Jesus. She didn't just vanish, I said quietly. He used the same pattern. Emotional isolation, medical collusion, and it ended in death. Harrison's face darkened. We'll need more. This alone gets us attention, but not an indictment. I'm working on it, I said. Tonight, I'll try to access the second drive in his office. I know the password now. He's careless when he thinks he's winning. Before I left, Harrison handed me a small device. Mini recorder, just in case you can get him talking. Back home, I walked into the kitchen and found Nathan sipping coffee like nothing happened. He greeted me with a lazy smile and a kiss on the cheek. "Didn't hear you leave," he said. "Early class," I replied. He nodded, then added almost too casually, "Thinking of having people over this weekend. Dinner party." I blinked. "Anyone in particular?" "Just old friends. Sarah used to join us, remember?" My blood turned to ice. He was baiting me. What kind of man invites the doctor who helped fake another woman's death to a dinner in his own home? If you realized your life was following the same deadly script as someone already erased, how would you fight back? Stay with me for Chapter 4, where every guest has a secret, and the meal might just be the trap. Chapter 4. The trust they tried to erase. Some people destroy paper trails. Others try to rewrite your existence altogether. The day my name appeared on the Blackwood family trust documents wasn't a celebration. It was a silent war declaration. It was 12:01 a.m. I watched the time flick over on the clock above the courthouse steps, standing just across the street in the shadows. My breath fogged in the cold Washington air as the digital timestamp confirmed what Marcus never expected. I had lived long enough to inherit everything. By the trust terms, on the day I turned 30, I became the sole beneficiary of the Blackwood estate. Over $300 million in liquid and trust assets, including our ancestral property in Charleston. 2 offshore holdings in the Caribbean, and controlling shares in Blackwood Equity Group. And Marcus, who had thought he'd have all of it by now, didn't even know I was still breathing. The legal team, headed by Harrison Mitchell, had worked in secret with me for months. From filing protective orders to documenting the falsified health records Marcus's team submitted, to tracing the flow of funds he quietly diverted to shell companies. Every move had to be meticulous. Harrison's office became my safe house. We met in odd hours, in coded appointments where every document we discussed had a shadow behind it. That morning when the filing went public, everything changed. Within 2 hours, my face was back in systems I'd been erased from. Medical databases updated, my driver's license was reactivated, and most importantly, the Department of Treasury received a return to rightful heir clause submission. It was no longer a hypothetical. I was alive, and I was the one Marcus had failed to eliminate. The first sign he knew came swiftly. A courier. Envelope left at my temporary residence. No name, no return address. Just a single sheet inside with the words, "Enjoy it while it lasts. They'll never believe you." I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers trembling. I knew what they meant: the press, the board members, the donors, the public who'd mourned the brave widow of Marcus Blackwood's late wife. He had begun crafting the narrative long before I disappeared. That I was unstable, withdrawn, unfit. And now he'd try to make sure the public never questioned that story, even if I stood right in front of them. But I wasn't hiding anymore. With Harrison's help, we drafted a motion to trigger a forensic audit of the trust. We had enough evidence to question every transaction Marcus had touched in the last 18 months. More than that, we prepared a request to the Department of Justice to re-examine the suspicious accidental death of a woman named Vanessa Lawton, another trust heir who had died under remarkably similar circumstances. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a pattern, a network. And in the middle of it stood Marcus, smiling, successful, untouchable, until now. That afternoon, we met with Agent Maria Santos again, this time in a public location, a coffee shop in DuPont Circle, bustling, noisy, and wide open. She handed me a plain envelope as she spoke casually about the weather. Inside, there was a USB stick and a typed note. "We've confirmed the surveillance audio. He wasn't working alone." I didn't ask who he was. We both knew. I didn't ask who else. That answer would come soon enough. What I did ask, softly, as I sipped my coffee with hands that barely shook anymore, was one question. "Are you ready for war?" Maria looked at me, then nodded. "I thought you'd never ask." The laughter on that recording wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, controlled, clinical. My therapist, Dr. Evelyn Morris, the woman I had confided in for years, the one who held the keys to my most private fears, was on the audio file laughing as she said, "She won't make it to 30. And if she does, she won't remember her name." My chest tightened. For a long moment, I sat frozen at the desk in the rental apartment, the screen casting a cold glow over my face. I didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, I opened the rest of the files. There were 6 audio recordings, each marked only by a date and timestamp. Every single one was damning. Evelyn talking to Marcus. Evelyn talking to Sarah Morrison, his alleged business partner. Evelyn directing a man named Conrad to adjust my prescriptions, just enough to induce disorientation, not hospitalization. And worse, laughing about how I once broke down crying in her office after a nightmare. They hadn't just manipulated me, they orchestrated my collapse. I forwarded the files immediately to Agent Santos and Harrison, encrypting them in 2 separate channels. Then I closed the laptop and sat in silence. The room felt unfamiliar. My skin felt unfamiliar. It was as if the entire narrative of my life had been revised, authored by strangers, signed in my name. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the Medical Board of Washington, D.C., against Dr. Evelyn Morris. A quiet storm began brewing, one Marcus couldn't control. Meanwhile, Harrison submitted the forensic audit request. Within 48 hours, the trustees of the Blackwood Family Trust, previously loyal to Marcus, were notified of inconsistencies in the disbursement reports. One of them, Mrs. Lillian Prescott, reached out to me personally. She was old school, the kind who believed in handwritten letters and, "I remember your mother," she said gently over the phone. "She fought to preserve this trust for you, not for him. If what you're saying is true, I think it's time we reopen the vault." The vault. My pulse jumped. Hidden within the private archives of the Blackwood estate in Charleston was the original paper trail. The handwritten documents from the 1940s, the videotaped testimonies of prior trustees, and, most importantly, a sealed letter from my mother, dated 2 months before her death. For years, Marcus claimed the vault had been damaged in a flood. Lillian knew otherwise, and now she was offering me access. I booked a red-eye to Charleston that night. As the plane descended, through soft southern clouds and the city lights of the old estate glimmered below, I braced myself for what lay ahead. The trust wasn't just money. It was memory, legacy, and betrayal written in ink and blood. If they tried to erase it, then I had to recover it, piece by piece. That morning, Lillian greeted me at the gates. No guards, no pomp, just her and a brass key. We entered the archives room beneath the main house, smelling of cedar, parchment, and dust. She pulled open the lockbox, handed me the envelope with trembling hands, and stepped back. Inside, my mother's final handwritten statement. A ledger of trust disbursements. A single name circled in red ink. Vanessa L. I looked up at Lillian, heart racing. "She knew," I whispered. She nodded. She feared Marcus before anyone else did. I folded the documents back with care. We'd need legal verification, cross-reference to the DOJ inquiry, and a formal announcement to reclaim oversight. But more than anything, I needed to warn the others. If Vanessa was gone, who else was next? Who took that photo of me outside the Charleston estate, and how long have they been watching? If the people I trusted with my mind were the same ones plotting my downfall, who can I trust with my life? Don't miss Chapter 5, where shadows turn into names, and the predator steps into the light. Chapter 5. The network that mistook me for prey. They didn't expect me to survive the plan. They certainly never expected me to outthink it. The cold hallway of the Charleston FBI field office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and sterilized air. It didn't match the chaos inside me. I sat across from Agent Renner, my hand clenched around the USB drive like it was a weapon. Inside that slim piece of plastic were audio recordings, emails, forged forms, and video surveillance. Evidence tying Nathan to a network of financial predators who used marriages like mine as hunting grounds. "Your husband's not just a bad man," Renner said, flipping through the digital files on his screen. "He's a blueprint, a recruiter. This is just you, Rachel. It's about how many others he's led to ruin." For a moment, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the beginning of their end. The documents we uncovered over the last few days showed a deliberate system, almost surgical. Nathan had filed multiple claims on false trusts, shifting assets of his former clients into shell companies. Sarah Morrison, once introduced to me as his friend from college, turned out to be the legal architect of this operation. And then there was Dr. Richard Talbot, the so-called wellness coach, who had been subtly preparing the psychological documentation required to declare me legally unstable. A trifecta of manipulation. "Do you understand what this means?" Agent Renner asked. "We can't go after just him. We need all of them. We need your story to draw them in." I hesitated. Publicly becoming the face of this case meant putting everything on display. My marriage, my vulnerabilities, my mistakes. But then I remembered the face of Megan Holt, the woman whose family filed a missing person report after she disappeared post-divorce, and whose signature now mysteriously appeared on a trust transfer form. My silence might protect me, but my voice could protect dozens of others. Renner's team began preparing subpoenas. I returned to the house, no longer a wife, no longer naive, but a silent informant. The plan was simple. Nathan would go to one last network dinner in Atlanta, the same type of meeting he once begged me not to ask about, but this time I'd given the FBI every location, every name, every backup plan he kept in his fireproof safe. Back at home, the mask of normalcy felt heavier than ever. Nathan poured wine and smirked like the man who'd already won. "You've been quiet lately," he said, "thinking about what happens after your birthday?" I smiled. "Actually, I've been thinking about what happens on my birthday." Later that night, I found myself alone in the bathroom, staring at a hidden microphone tucked behind the tile. I whispered into it. "Not just my lines, but my truth. I am not broken, I am not yours, and I will never be what you thought I was." I stepped back into the hallway with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in months. I didn't sleep that night. The moment Renner's voice crackled through the burner phone with the update that Nathan had moved the trust withdrawal 24 hours earlier, I knew the clock was ticking faster than we had planned for. Every breath felt heavier. Every sound in the house, every creak in the wood or click of the thermostat made me flinch. But fear was no longer a weight, it was a compass. It pointed me to the truth, and I would not ignore it again. Downstairs, Nathan typed away in his office, door half closed. He always left it like that when he wanted me to believe he wasn't hiding anything. He was always hiding something. I slipped back into the master bedroom, opened the closet safe. Combination still 13/7/1987, his mother's birthday, and pulled out the blue folder labeled Next Phase. Inside were copies of notarized power of attorney forms, fake physician evaluations, and, most chilling, a life insurance policy under my name, signed not in my handwriting. There it was, the real plan. If the trust didn't work, my death would. At 3:14 a.m., I met Renner in a parking garage outside Charleston Regional Bank. He didn't look like a man with good news. "We just picked up chatter. A private jet leaves at 9:30 a.m. from Savannah Executive. Nathan, Sarah, and Talbot are all booked under aliases. You were right. Today was always the real play." He handed me a duffel bag. Inside A wire, a pen recorder, and a legal envelope stamped with federal insignia. You go to breakfast like you planned. You act like you know nothing, but when he hands you anything, papers, phones, even a gift, we'll be listening. What if he doesn't hand me anything? Then don't worry, Renner said, grim. He will. They always do when they think they've won. By 8:05, the kitchen was filled with the smell of rosemary potatoes and bacon. Nathan whistled to himself. He always cooked when he felt confident. I sat across the island, trying not to show my shaking fingers as I sipped coffee. "This is a big day," he said, sliding an envelope across the counter. "A little something from me. Call it a peace offering." I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I looked him in the eye. "Why now, Nathan? Why all this?" He chuckled, leaning in close. "Because, Rachel, I was tired of waiting for you to become the woman you pretended to be." The words hit like stone, not because they hurt, but because they confirmed what I always feared. He never loved me. He loved the idea of breaking me. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a document signed and dated with my name, transferring full access of the Donovan Trust to Horizon Global, LLC. The signature looked identical to mine, but it wasn't mine. The wire captured every word that followed. "All you have to do," Nathan said smoothly, "is tell the lawyers you meant to sign it. Clean, easy, no question." I smiled. "That's the difference between us, Nathan. I do ask questions." Seconds later, the house exploded with sound. FBI agents stormed through both doors. Nathan turned, furious, his eyes darting. I backed away. Renner's voice boomed. "Hands where I can see them, now!" Sarah was dragged from a car outside, screaming. Dr. Talbot was already in cuffs. Nathan looked at me one last time, confused, betrayed, maybe even a little afraid. "Rachel, you did this?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Nathan, you did this. I just stopped letting you lie about it." How deep does the network go if Nathan was only a pawn? And who's still pulling the strings behind the scene? If your fight for justice exposed something far bigger than revenge, would you still keep going, knowing you're now the target? Join me in Chapter 6, where truth meets legacy, and I step into the role they tried so hard to erase. How deep does the network go if Nathan was only a pawn? And who's still pulling the strings behind the scenes? If your fight for justice exposed something far bigger than revenge, would you still keep going, knowing you're now the target? Join me in Chapter 6, where truth meets legacy, and I step into the role they tried so hard to erase. Chapter 6, the legacy I was born to protect. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I was born with a key. A key they tried to bury, silence, and steal, but it was always mine, and now I was ready to turn the lock. The morning after the trial felt like waking from a war. Rachel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Harris and Mitchell's office, overlooking downtown Boston. The sky was low and gray, as if the clouds had watched every betrayal unfold and were now mourning in silence. Final signatures had been delivered. The Donovan Trust, all $300 million, 0 cents of it, was legally and irrevocably hers. "Do you want a moment alone?" Harrison asked gently, setting down a leather folder on the mahogany table. "No," Rachel replied without turning around. "Not alone. Not anymore." The folder contained more than just legal confirmations. Inside were records of every other family the network had attempted to ruin. Over 30 names, over 30 women who'd been gaslit, locked away, deemed unstable while their estates were quietly siphoned. Rachel's fingers brushed the papers, her gaze falling on one file marked Erica Sandoval, deceased, overdose ruling, pending re-investigation. "I don't want this to end with me," Rachel said quietly. Harrison nodded. "It doesn't have to." That afternoon, Rachel visited the rehab facility where Sarah Morrison was now being held under protective custody. Sarah, pale and unmade, no longer had the sharpness in her eyes, but something else had settled in their place: shame. And maybe, just maybe, regret. Rachel stood across the glass partition. "You almost helped kill me," Rachel said, "but I read your file. You were a pawn too." Sarah didn't speak at first. Then, "I can give you the names, more than the FBI has, but I want a deal." Rachel turned to the agent beside her. "If she cooperates fully, full immunity. But I want oversight." "You want to lead this?" the agent asked. "I want to protect every woman they thought would break quietly." By week's end, Rachel stood behind a podium at the National Financial Justice Summit in D.C. She wore a navy suit and a quiet confidence that seemed to hum through the marble hall. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become a catalyst. "My name is Rachel Donovan," she began, "and 2 months ago I was nearly erased by a network that knew exactly how to manipulate fear, family, and finance. But here I stand, not just as a survivor, but as a protector of a legacy bigger than blood or money." Gasps rippled through the room when she unveiled the founding of the Donovan Initiative, a foundation offering legal, psychological, and financial resources to victims of inheritance fraud and domestic financial abuse. Harrison stood beside her. So did Maria Santos. And among the crowd, a few familiar faces. Erica's sister, a former client of Marcus, even the judge from her final hearing. Rachel's voice didn't tremble once. "They tried to turn my inheritance into a weapon. I've turned it into a shield." That night, she returned to the now renovated Donovan estate in Martha's Vineyard. The hallways were quieter, warmer. She'd turned Marcus's cold, modern tastes into something human again. Wood floors, open shelves, books, art from women-owned galleries, and in the center of the sitting room on display, not awards or certificates, but the original handwritten letter her grandmother once wrote her. "One day, you'll understand what this name really means." Rachel pressed her hand to the glass frame. "I do now." Rachel wasn't naive enough to believe that justice ended in a courtroom or at a press podium. Real justice was quieter, more complicated. It came in the form of follow-up phone calls, survivors breaking their silence, and the heavy, aching quiet of sleepless nights when memories clawed at her chest. Late one evening, while reviewing new case files at her home office, a soft knock sounded at the door. Maria Santos stepped in, her face drawn but determined. "We've tracked another cluster," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Same pattern. Women in 3 different states, all declared mentally unfit before key inheritances were transferred to shell companies." Rachel opened the folder and blinked. "I recognize that signature," she whispered. Maria leaned in. "Nathan wasn't the one forging these documents. He was executing someone else's design. Look at the notary stamp." Rachel's chest tightened. She stared at the embossed initials. E.E.W.M. Evelyn Wallace. Marcus's aunt. The same woman who mentored him in estate law and vanished from public view years ago. "She's not dead," Maria said. "She just changed her name. Evelyn's been running a sub-network tied to at least 6 offshore accounts." For a long moment, Rachel said nothing. Then, "We haven't closed this chapter. We've only opened the real one." 2 weeks later, Rachel sat in a secure interview room at a federal facility in Virginia. Across the table was a familiar face, Carter Blackwell, a former investment manager tied to the Donovan Trust's early days and a longtime friend of Evelyn Wallace. "You always had your grandmother's fire," Carter said, smiling weakly. "She saw through all of us. That's why she left the trust with you." Rachel placed a small recorder on the table. "I want names, I want timelines, and I want to know exactly how many women were targeted under your management." Carter sighed. "There's more than you think. We started with elderly heiresses. The goal wasn't greed, not at first. It was preservation. Keep the wealth in the right hands." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "And who decided whose hands were right?" People like Evelyn, he said simply. And now, people like you? She stood slowly. No, I don't preserve legacy by destroying women to do it. I protect it by changing who gets to define it. Back in her office, Rachel drafted a letter. Not a legal document, not a press release, but something personal. A letter to the next generation of girls who might inherit not just money, but danger cloaked in silk and blood ties. They will call you unstable, too emotional, unfit. They will dress their fear as concern and wrap it in a bow called protection. But hear me now. Your clarity is not a threat. Your truth is not a liability. You are not their prey. You are the beginning of something they can't erase. She signed it. R.D. The sun dipped behind the vineyard horizon as Rachel sealed the letter into an envelope marked Donovan Initiative Archive 1. That night, while pouring herself a glass of wine, Rachel's phone buzzed. An encrypted message from a hidden number lit up the screen. You stopped one branch, but the roots go deeper than Boston, deeper than Marcus. You ready for the next storm? Attached was a photo, grainy, nighttime surveillance of Rachel speaking with Sarah at the recovery center. A second photo followed, Harrison Mitchell leaving her office. Rachel froze. Someone was still watching. She didn't respond. Instead, she powered down the phone, locked it away, and opened her secure laptop. As files loaded and code scrolled down the screen, her jaw clenched. This time she would strike first. 1 year later, the world had shifted, not just for Rachel, but for every name the Donovan Initiative now carried in its encrypted records. Rachel Donovan became a public speaker, though she never planned to. She stood behind microphones at women's shelters, financial ethics conferences, and Ivy League law schools. Not to be admired, but to remind people of what nearly happened. Her voice, once trembled behind closed doors, now steadied thousands. She wore her scars like armor. People no longer whispered her name with pity. They printed it on banners beside words like founder, survivor, and protector. Jessica opened her own investigative paralegal firm, quietly backed by Rachel's foundation. She specialized in helping women navigate fraudulent estate claims, often against charming men in expensive suits. She laughed more now. A kind of freedom that came from knowing she fought back and helped others do the same. Harrison Mitchell left corporate trust management and began working with a federal task force on financial abuse and estate exploitation. His reputation once rested on managing billions. Now he measured his worth in something quieter. In safety returned to families, in systems rebuilt to protect, not control. Sarah Morrison, once part of the machine that almost killed Rachel, spent 9 months in witness protection. After testifying, she moved to Oregon under a new identity, running a bookstore that specialized in memoirs written by survivors. Rachel received a handwritten note on her birthday. I hope you burn down every inch of what they built. Thank you for letting me live long enough to watch it fall. And Marcus? He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy, financial fraud, and attempted murder. During the trial, he never looked at Rachel, not once. But on the final day, just before the verdict was read, he whispered something to his attorney that still echoed in the court transcripts. I never thought she'd be the one to win. But she didn't win for revenge. Rachel had outgrown that word. Victory now looked like silence. The good kind. Like walking into her new home without checking the locks 3 times. Like mentoring a teenage girl who just inherited a trust her uncle tried to steal. Like sitting under the sun in the vineyard her grandmother once dreamed of, and knowing without doubt she had protected something bigger than herself. She hadn't just survived the legacy, she had rewritten it. Thanks for watching Day of Revenge. If you love drama, secrets, and jaw-dropping twists, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories.